Hey, my name is Owen Hargrove. I'm 33 years old, and I design buildings for a small firm called Ridgeline in downtown Denver. The kind of work where every mistake you make shows up in concrete and glass for the next 40 years. I hadn't heard Claire Donovan's name spoken out loud in 4 years. Other than that one brief exception, we had been strangers for 15. I didn't expect any of it to change on a rainy Thursday night in the middle of October, over the phone, from a woman I had never met. I was still at the office a little past 9, laying out elevations for a competition entry due in 4 days, when my phone lit up on the drafting table. Local area code, number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring out. I picked it up on the 4th ring anyway, mostly out of habit. Is this Owen Hargrove? The voice on the other end had the kind of trained, calm hospitals build into people over years of practice. Speaking. My name is Dana. I'm a charge nurse at Lakeview General. I'm sorry to call so late. Your number came up as the emergency contact saved on her phone, under medical ID. Her name is Claire Donovan. I actually laughed, a short, confused sound that had nowhere else to go. I think there's been a mix-up. I haven't really spoken to Claire in years. I understand this must come as a surprise. Yours was the only emergency contact listed on her phone. She was in a car accident this evening. She's alive, but she's being prepped for surgery, and the surgical team asked us to notify the emergency contact listed in her medical ID, and to see whether you might be able to help us locate any family or provide medical history. I should have called the hospital's main line back before doing anything else, just to be sure, the way you're supposed to when a stranger asks you to trust them with something this large. I almost did, but something in the way Dana said Claire's full name, like she was reading it straight off a chart, made my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with caution. I'm coming, I said. Which hospital? She told me. I was already reaching for my jacket. The drive should have taken 22 minutes. Rain had started somewhere around Colfax, the kind that turns brake lights into long red smears against the windshield, and I kept circling the same thought without landing anywhere useful. There had to be another Claire Donovan. A clerical mix-up, a coincidence, a database error, because the Claire I knew hadn't called me, texted me, or so much as liked a photo of mine in 4 years. Not since Amelia Cho's wedding, where we'd stood by the coat check exchanging numbers we both half knew. Even then, we might never actually use. I made it in 19 minutes, which meant I ran 2 lights that were closer to red than I want to admit to. Inside, the emergency room had that particular fluorescent white that makes everyone under it look like they're already halfway to being a ghost. I gave the woman at the front desk my name, and before she'd even finished typing it into her computer, a set of double doors down a side hallway swung open, and a gurney came through fast, flanked by 2 people in scrubs. I only had it for 2 seconds, maybe 3. 2 seconds was enough. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, pushed back from her face by the strap holding an oxygen mask in place. A bruise had already started to darken along her jaw. Her eyes were closed the way sleep never quite manages, too still, too complete. I hadn't seen Claire Donovan since Amelia Cho's wedding, 4 years earlier, and I met her again like that. A face rushing past me toward a set of doors marked surgical services, gone before I could say anything at all, before I even understood that I wanted to. Dana found me in the waiting area a few minutes later, and gave me the kind of update that tells you everything and nothing at once. Internal bleeding they needed to repair. A skull fracture, with bleeding and swelling underneath it serious enough that the surgeons wanted to relieve the pressure right away. A broken wrist that, she said, almost apologetically, was the least of anyone's concerns tonight. The surgery would take a few hours at least. Someone would find me when there was more to say. There's also a Grace Delgado, the county child welfare caseworker our social work team contacted, Dana added, already half turned to go. She asked to speak with you when you have a minute. It's about Miss Donovan's daughter. I said the only thing I had. Her daughter. Something shifted in Dana's face, a small recalibration, like she'd assumed I already knew. She's 9. She wasn't in the car. She's fine. She's safe with a neighbor tonight. But we haven't been able to locate a legal guardian or family member who can take over her care. I sat down because my legs asked me to, not because I'd decided to. 15 years of barely knowing anything about this woman's life. And somehow the size of that gap hadn't been fully real to me until right then. Until a 9-year-old with no one else to call became one more thing I hadn't seen coming tonight. A woman in a cardigan the color of weak tea crossed the waiting room a few minutes later, a folder tucked under one arm, and introduced herself as Grace Delgado before I'd even fully stood up. The hospital had called her office, she explained, because Sadie didn't have a legal caregiver available. Mr. Hargrove, I want to be straightforward with you, because I don't think tonight is a night for anything else. She sat down across from me without waiting to be invited, which I appreciated more than I expected to. Miss Donovan listed you as her only emergency contact. Not a parent, not a sibling, you. I don't know what that means between the two of you, and it's not my business tonight. What is my business is that her daughter, Sadie, is currently with a neighbor, a Mrs. Alvarez, who is 78 years old and leaves Saturday morning for a medical appointment out of state that's been on the books for months. The county has to open an emergency placement case either way. If no suitable adult can step in by Saturday, Sadie goes into emergency foster care while her mother recovers. How long does something like that usually take? Once it starts, sometimes weeks, sometimes longer if things get complicated. She watched me carefully, not unkindly. I'm not telling you what to do, Mr. Hargrove. I'm telling you what happens if nobody does anything. I need to think. I stopped myself, because that wasn't the whole truth. Can I meet her? Tomorrow, whenever makes sense. I'm not saying I know what I'm doing here. I'd like to meet her. Grace almost smiled. Tomorrow's better. Tonight she needs sleep, not another stranger. She stood, handed me a card. Get some rest yourself if you can manage it. It's going to be a long week. The waiting room emptied out around midnight, down to a man asleep sitting upright in the corner and me, holding a paper cup of coffee I'd stopped drinking an hour earlier. I kept doing the math without meaning to. 15 years since we graduated. 9 years since, apparently, an entire other person had been born into her life. A person who had existed for as long as some of my co-workers' marriages, without my knowing she existed at all. We were 17 the last time it really mattered. Sitting on the hood of my car outside her house close to midnight, the same kind of late as it was right now. Her mother had been sick for the better part of a year by then, the kind of sick where the whole house rearranges itself around it, and Claire had started missing things, school dances, lunch, some nights, my calls. I didn't understand it as grief yet, not really, not at 17. I understood it as her pulling away from me specifically, which wasn't true, but felt true. And at that age, those are close enough to the same thing to do the same damage. I told her I'd wait as long as she needed. She told me I shouldn't have to. We went back and forth on it the way people do when neither one actually wants to be having the conversation. And at the end of it, I said something I meant so completely it scared me a little. Even then, if you ever need me for anything, I'll come. I don't care when. I don't care what for. I'll come. She laughed, a small wet sound, and told me I was being dramatic, the way she deflected most things that got too close to true. Her mother died that summer, not long after we graduated, and Claire didn't call me. I told myself she needed space. I left for college at the end of August the way I'd planned to all along, and somewhere in the distance between one semester and the next, not calling became not knowing how to call, which became not calling at all. 15 years is a long time to let a habit run, There was exactly one exception in all that time. 4 years ago, at Amelia Cho's wedding back in our hometown, I looked up from a table of people I barely recognized anymore and found Claire 3 seats down, laughing at something the best man had said. We ended up talking near the coat check for 20 minutes while the DJ played something slow. We didn't talk about her mother, or my leaving, or any of it. We talked about nothing, the safe kind of nothing 2 people build when there's too much real to talk about instead. Before I left, she asked for my number, in case, she said, without finishing the sentence. I gave it to her. She never used it. Until, apparently tonight, in the one way that mattered. It was almost 2 in the morning when a woman introduced herself as Dr. Marlowe and told me, in the careful, sturdy language doctors use when they want to give you hope without handing you a promise, that the surgery had gone as well as it could have. They'd relieved the pressure on her brain and repaired the bleeding, but they were keeping her sedated for now, giving the swelling time to go down before anyone would know more. Days, not hours, maybe longer. Is she going to be all right? I asked, hating how much I sounded like I had the right to ask. I think she has a good chance, Dr. Marlowe said, which is what doctors say when they mean I don't know yet, but I'm not going to lie to you either. I went home a little after 3, showered off a day that had started as an ordinary Thursday, and lay in bed until my alarm went off at 6. Not sleeping so much as waiting for morning with my eyes closed. Grace met me on the porch of a small blue house 2 doors down from an address I'd never had a reason to know, and warned me, quietly, before we went in, that Sadie had been told her mother was alive, that the doctors were taking good care of her, and that nobody knew yet exactly when she'd wake up, and nothing more than that. Kids can carry more than we give them credit for, she said. But they should only carry what's true and what's necessary. Follow her lead, not the other way around. Mrs. Alvarez answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and behind her, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug surrounded by colored pencils, was a girl with Claire's exact chin and a stranger's watchful eyes, studying me like I was a problem she hadn't decided whether to trust. Sadie, this is Owen, Grace said. A friend of your mom's. Sadie didn't say hello. She set down her pencil, tilted her head, and asked, "Are you the Owen from the picture?" I looked at Grace, who looked equally caught off guard, then back at Sadie. "I don't know. What picture?" She got up without answering and disappeared down the hallway, coming back a minute later with a shoebox that had clearly moved between more than one home in its lifetime. She dug through it with the focus of someone much older and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being opened and closed 100 times. She held it out to me like a test. It was a sketch, my handwriting, or the 16-year-old version of it, labeling a floor plan for a house that didn't exist anywhere except on that piece of paper. A wraparound porch, a kitchen with too many windows, a small room marked, in careful architect's block letters even back then, Claire's reading room. I remembered drawing it during a physics class I was failing. Remembered folding it into a square and handing it to her. Remembered her saying, "You're going to build this for real someday," and me saying, "Only if you're in it." Mom kept it on the fridge my whole life, Sadie said. Then she put it in here when we moved. She said a boy named Owen drew it when they were teenagers, and he was going to be an architect, and he probably forgot all about it by now. She looked up at me, unblinking. "Did you forget?" My throat did something complicated. "No," I said. "I didn't forget." She studied me a second longer, like she was deciding whether that answer counted for anything, and then, apparently satisfied, asked when she could see her mom. I told her I'd find out. Grace stepped in gently, explaining that visits could happen once Claire was more stable, that for now the most important job Sadie had was getting good sleep and going to school like normal. Sadie accepted this the way kids accept most adult logic, without agreeing to like it, and left the shoebox open on the coffee table instead of putting it away, which felt, somehow, like the first small door left open on purpose. Grace and I worked out the rest of it standing in Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen while Sadie went back to her pencils. Given the timeline, and given that uprooting a 9-year-old to a stranger's apartment on top of everything else felt like one disruption too many, Grace suggested I stay with Sadie at Claire's own place instead, keeping her school, her room, her routines intact, while everything else fell apart around them. Mrs. Alvarez dug a spare key out of a kitchen drawer, the one Claire had given her years ago for exactly this kind of emergency, and pressed it into my hand. Grace expedited my background check that evening, clean by nightfall, enough to secure an emergency county authorization, with a judge set to review the placement Monday. Temporary, she said twice, like she wanted to be sure I heard it both times. By Saturday morning, when Mrs. Alvarez left for her appointment with a small suitcase and a promise to call, I had a toothbrush in Claire's bathroom and a folder of paperwork Grace had walked me through twice. We spent the afternoon at the grocery store 2 blocks from the apartment, and Sadie narrated her mother's shopping habits to me, item by item, like a tour guide who took the job seriously. She always smells the cantaloupes, even though she can't tell which ones are good. At the checkout, the cashier, an older man who clearly knew them both, asked where Claire was, and Sadie answered before I could, matter of fact in a way that landed harder than she meant it to. "She's in the hospital. Owen's helping until she's better." The cashier looked at me half a second too long, then just nodded and told her to tell her mom he said hello. That first night in the apartment felt like touring a museum exhibit of a life I'd missed. Art supplies sorted by color into mason jars on the windowsill. A calendar on the fridge in handwriting I still would have recognized blind, marking a dentist appointment and a parent-teacher conference. A framed photo on the bookshelf of Claire and Sadie at what looked like a pumpkin patch, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Sadie showed up in the kitchen doorway around 11, in pajamas covered in tiny painted planets, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear like she wasn't sure if she was too old for it anymore. "I can't sleep in my room," she said. "It's too quiet without her checking on me." I didn't know the right thing to say to that, so I said the true thing instead. "I don't think there's a correct amount of quiet for that. I'm sorry." She considered this like it was a reasonable answer, which, from a 9-year-old at 11 at night, felt like a small victory. "Can you check on me, even though you don't know how she does it?" "I can learn." I walked her back to her room and sat in the doorway, not the way Claire apparently did it, whatever that looked like, but some rough approximation of it, until her breathing evened out. I stayed a few minutes longer than I strictly needed to, listening to a 9-year-old sleep in an apartment that belonged to a woman I'd barely known for the past 15 years, and thought, not for the first time that day, that I had no real idea what I was doing and was going to keep doing it anyway. On Sunday, Grace arranged for Sadie to see her mother and prepared her beforehand for the tubes and the machines and the stillness, the way Claire wouldn't quite look like Claire for a while yet. Sadie stopped in the hallway outside the room and asked if her mom would know she was there, even sleeping like that. I told her the truth, that nobody knew for certain, but that a lot of doctors believed people could hear more than they let on, and that it couldn't hurt to talk like she was listening. Sadie nodded seriously, filing it away like a rule to follow. Inside, she pulled a chair right up to the bed on her own, without being told, and held her mother's hand for exactly 4 minutes by my count. Told her about a spelling test and a disagreement with a girl named Ruby over the good swing at recess, and then asked to leave, quietly, like she'd used up whatever bravery she'd brought with her. In the elevator down, she didn't cry. She just held onto the shoebox with the folded house sketch inside it and didn't let go of it again for the rest of the week. The judge reviewed and approved the placement Monday morning without much fuss, more interested in Grace's paperwork than in meeting me, and the rest of the day brought its own small disasters. In the pickup line that afternoon, I sat behind a row of minivans and watched other parents trade the easy shorthand of people who'd done this every day for years and felt like an obvious imposter in a life that wasn't mine yet. A woman in the car ahead of me caught my eye in her side mirror and gave a small, uncertain wave, the kind you give someone you can't quite place. I waved back and didn't explain anything because I didn't have an explanation that would fit inside the length of a stoplight. The school called Grace, not me, when I actually tried to collect Sadie, because my name wasn't on any approved list anywhere in the world, a fact the front office secretary relayed with the patient suspicion of someone who had definitely watched this exact situation go badly before. Grace smoothed it over with one phone call. At lunch that same day, I'd packed Sadie a sandwich the way I would have wanted one, and she handed it back at pickup, uneaten, with the specific patience of someone breaking bad news gently. "I don't do crusts," she said. "Mom knows that." Then, after a beat, almost surprising herself, "You'll know it now, though." I also missed the competition deadline that day, the first one I'd missed in 6 years at Ridgeline. My boss, a woman named Delia who had never once told me to take a day off in all that time, told me to take as many as I needed, and I found I meant it when I thanked her, in a way I don't think I'd meant many things lately. By Tuesday, the school had issued me a temporary pickup badge with my photo on it, which Sadie found so funny she asked to keep it in her backpack, in case, she said, you get lost. That same afternoon, I was in the hospital cafeteria, not really eating a sandwich so much as taking it apart, when a man I'd never met sat down across from me without asking and said, "You're the one they gave my granddaughter to." He introduced himself as Richard Donovan, Claire's father, a fact that took a full 5 seconds to land, because in the years I'd known Claire, I could remember her mentioning him maybe twice, and never kindly. Once, years ago, she'd said only that he left when she was 11 and started over 2 states away. Like the first family had been a rough draft he decided to revise. He'd driven in from Ohio the night before, he told me now, after someone from their old church tracked him down through a cousin. He wanted to see his daughter. He wanted, he said, looking at me like I was an obstacle he hadn't budgeted for, to see his granddaughter too. "She's staying with me right now," I said. "Grace Delgado handles the arrangements. I can give you her number. So you, a man my daughter apparently never once mentioned to me, get to raise my granddaughter, while I have to go through a caseworker just to see her." I let that sit a second, because he wasn't entirely wrong to be angry, even if he was aiming it at the wrong target. "I'm not raising her. I'm making sure she has somewhere stable to sleep until her mother wakes up and can make these decisions herself. If you want to be part of that, Grace is who makes it official. I'm not going to be the reason a 9-year-old has one more unfamiliar adult showing up without warning this week." His jaw worked for a second. "I know how this looks." "I don't know how it looks. I met Sadie 4 days ago." I paused. "But I know she went quiet when Grace mentioned your name yesterday." "I don't know the history there." "I'm guessing you do." He didn't have an answer for that. He left without finishing his coffee. Wednesday, the news turned. Claire spiked a fever the doctors didn't love, and the cautious optimism from the weekend tightened back into the sturdy, careful language I'd already learned to brace for. They wanted a couple more days before reducing her sedation, wanted to be sure whatever was happening wasn't an infection settling into something worse. I didn't tell Sadie the specifics. I told her the truth in the size she could hold, that her mom needed a little more time, and that this wasn't the same thing as bad news, even though, standing in that hallway myself, I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. My friend Theo talked me into coffee that same afternoon, mostly because he was worried about me and didn't know a more direct way to say so. "You understand how this sounds," he said, stirring a coffee he wasn't drinking either, an old habit of his I recognized because it was also mine. A woman you dated in high school lists you as her emergency contact, and a week later you're doing school pickups for her kid and getting into standoffs with her estranged father in a hospital cafeteria. We didn't stand off. You know what I mean. He studied me a second. Are you doing this because you actually want to, or because you feel like you have to now that you're standing in the middle of it? It was a fair question, and I owed him an honest answer, mostly because I owed myself one too. Both, probably. At first it was just, someone had to. Then Sadie showed me a drawing I made when I was 16 that her mother had kept all these years, and it stopped being about what I had to do. I turned my cup slowly on the table. I don't know what this is yet, Theo. I know I'm not walking away from it to find out. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they've stopped arguing, not because they're convinced, but because they can tell you already are. Just don't disappear on me the way you did after Meredith. I hadn't thought about Meredith in a long time. The last relationship I'd let get close enough to matter before I found reasons it wouldn't work and made them come true. This is different. I know, he said. That's what worries me a little, and what makes me think it might actually be good for you. That night, after Sadie was asleep, I drove back to the hospital instead of going home, and sat in the chair beside Claire's bed for the better part of an hour, machines keeping their quiet rhythm around her. I hadn't planned on saying anything, but the room had a way of pulling words out of you that daylight usually keeps locked down. Sadie beat me at checkers twice tonight, I told her, feeling foolish and not stopping anyway. I let her win the first game. I didn't let her win the second one. She's better than she should be for 9. I looked at the tube taped along her cheek, the bruise gone from purple to a sickly yellow-green at the edges. Your father's in town. I don't know what to do about that, honestly. I'm doing my best, is the truth of it. I keep waiting to feel qualified for any of this, and I don't think that feeling's coming, so I'm just going to keep going without it. I sat there a while longer, not saying anything else, just letting the machines fill in the silence, and before I left, for reasons I couldn't have explained to anyone watching, I repeated the same promise I'd made at 17, quieter this time, like a test to see if it still held any weight. I said I'd come. I'm here. Grace arranged a supervised visit for Richard on Thursday, 20 minutes in a family consultation room with a box of tissues nobody used. I waited outside, close enough to hear Sadie's voice go small and careful in a way I hadn't heard from her yet, answering her grandfather's questions in single words. When Richard came out afterward, he looked older than he had 2 days earlier. She doesn't know me, he said, like he was only now hearing himself say it out loud. I don't have the right to expect anything else. You could earn it, slowly, on her schedule, not yours. He nodded, and for the first time since he'd sat down across from me uninvited, didn't argue. Tell her I'll wait, however long that takes. Dr. Marlowe called me herself that Friday, a little past noon, and said 4 words that made me leave a client meeting mid-sentence. She's asking for you. Claire had surfaced briefly that morning, Dr. Marlowe explained, said my name once, and drifted back under before anyone could reach me. I broke 2 rules of my own driving over anyway, and made it in time to see her eyes open for real this time, not the flickering half-consciousness Dr. Marlowe had warned me was possible along the way, but actually open, actually finding the ceiling, then the window, then, slowly, me. It took her a second. I watched it happen, watched 15 years try to resolve themselves into a stranger's face standing in a hospital room, and then her mouth moved, dry and slow, around my name, Owen. Not a question, just my name, like she was checking it still worked. Hey, I don't know why that was the word that came out. 15 years and a 9-year-old with a shoebox full of folded paper, and the best I had was hey. Her eyes moved past me, scanning, and I understood the question before she had the strength to ask it. Sadie's fine, I said quickly. She's fine. She's been staying at your place. She's safe, I promise." Something in Claire's shoulders let go all at once, an entire structure of tension dropping out of her. She started crying without any of the sounds that usually go with it, just water finding its way down, and reached for my hand with the one that wasn't in a cast, gripping it harder than I would have thought possible for someone who'd been unconscious or heavily sedated for 8 days. "Why are you here?" she finally managed.
How are you
"How
even
are you
here?
even here? You listed me. Emergency contact." I tried to smile. "I got the strangest phone call of my life a little over a week ago." She laughed, a wet, broken sound that turned back into crying almost immediately. And I just held her hand and let her do both for as long as she needed to. I brought Sadie in an hour later, once Dr. Marlowe had cleared it, and stood back by the door to give them the room. Sadie didn't run. She walked to the side of the bed with the shoebox still tucked under one arm, set it carefully on the blanket, and said, "I kept it safe," like that was the most important report she had to deliver. Claire pulled her daughter half onto the bed, careful of the cast, and held on with the kind of grip that doesn't care about hospital rules. And over Sadie's shoulder, she looked at me and mouthed 2 words I felt more than heard. "Thank you." The following Monday, with Sadie back at school and the worst of the fever fully behind us, Claire and I finally had the conversation neither of us had figured out how to start. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said, out of nowhere, staring at a tray of hospital food she wasn't eating. "Coming every day, handling the school, and Grace, and apparently my father, who I still can't believe actually showed up." A pause. "You have a whole life, Owen. An actual life, with a job and probably people who wonder where you disappear to every evening." "I know I don't have to." "Then why?" "Because you listed me," I said. 4 years, 1 wedding, 20 minutes by a coat check, and you still put my number down as the person to call if your life fell apart." "I want to know why, Claire. I've had a week and a half to guess, and I'd rather just ask." She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer at all. When she did, her voice had gone smaller. "Because you were the last person who ever made me feel like I wasn't a problem to be managed," she said. "After my mom died, everyone had a role picked out for me. Poor Claire. Brave Claire. The girl who held it all together. Then Sadie's father left before she could hold her own head up, and that made me the tragic single mom. Another role. Another story people told about me instead of with me. You were the only person who ever just waited, without needing anything back." I thought about that more than I probably should have, for someone I hadn't spoken to in years. When the new student form at Sadie's school asked for an emergency contact, I put your number down without really thinking about it. A few months after that, my phone asked me to set up a medical ID in case something ever happened to me. I didn't think twice. I just typed your name in again. She looked up at me. "I don't think either of those was really about being practical." "What about you?" she asked after a moment, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, wincing slightly at the pull of the IV line. 15 years. Nobody in all that time? There was someone. Meredith. 3 years, actually, which should tell you something. I shrugged, more casual than I felt. I was careful with her in the wrong way. Careful like I was protecting something instead of building something. She used to say I kept 1 foot out the door even when I was standing still. She wasn't wrong. And now? Now I drove through a rainstorm because a stranger called and said your name, and I haven't had 1 foot out the door since. I said it plainly, because it was true, and because we'd both spent enough of our lives being careful with each other from a distance. I told you once I'd come, if you ever needed me. I don't think I meant it as a 15-year offer, but apparently that's what it turned into. You don't have to mean things for that long. Turns out I did, though, the whole time." I took her free hand. "I'm not here because of a form, Claire. I stayed because I wanted to. I'm still here for the same reason." She didn't answer with words. She just tightened her hand around mine. And for the first time in over a week, in maybe 15 years, neither of us needed to fill the silence with anything else. Claire came home 3 weeks after she opened her eyes, into an apartment that still had my toothbrush next to Sadie's in the bathroom cup. A detail none of us had quite gotten around to changing. We didn't call it dating, not at first. The word felt too small for whatever this actually was. Our first real evening out came in late November, a Tuesday, once Claire could sit upright for longer than 20 minutes without her head swimming. Mrs. Alvarez watched Sadie for 3 hours, while Claire and I sat in a mostly empty diner 2 blocks away, talking about everything we'd skipped over in the hospital because there hadn't been room for it yet. Somewhere between the coffee and a slice of pie neither of us had really wanted, she reached across the table the same way I had reached for her hand that first day she woke up. And I understood we'd quietly stopped being 2 people managing a crisis together and started being something else entirely. Richard visited twice more before Thanksgiving, always calling ahead, always leaving the moment Sadie got tired, slowly turning from a stranger into someone she'd wave at without hiding behind the door first. Claire's cast came off in December. Grace kept checking in through Claire's recovery and closed the case file in January, noting, in the dry language of someone who had watched 100 families reassemble themselves into 100 different shapes, that the household demonstrated appropriate stability. I framed that line, actually, and hung it next to the 16-year-old sketch of a house that finally, after all this time, had people living in it. I used to think the promise I made at 17 was the kind of thing you say once and then spend a lifetime slowly, quietly failing to keep. The way most big promises go once real life gets its hands on them. I don't think that anymore. I think some promises just wait, patient as anything, for the one moment they're actually needed, and then they show up exactly on time, even 15 years late. On a Sunday evening the following spring, Sadie sat at the kitchen table with a family tree assignment spread out in front of her, chewing the end of a colored pencil, working out where everyone went. She'd already filled in Claire, and a small, careful box for her biological father that she left mostly blank except for his name, and Richard, connected by a thin gray line she'd drawn herself, unprompted. Then she looked up at me, pencil hovering. "What do I even call this box for you? You're not my dad. You're not like my uncle." Claire, at the stove, didn't turn around, but I saw her go still, listening. "I don't know," I said. "What do you want to call it?" Sadie considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything, bent back over the paper, wrote something in careful block letters, and turned the page around to show me. Some questions, it turns out, get answered so simply you almost miss it happening. The box said, "Owen. He came when we needed him."